What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with Charles Oliveira almost scammed by a fan. Charles Oliveira has become one of the game's most popular fighters on account of his ridiculously aggressive style and his habit of finishing fights. After all, we're talking about a guy who holds the record for most finishes and fight night bonuses in the UFC. But if for some reason you're not already a fan of Du Plessis, this story could change your mind. And before we continue, make sure to leave a like on the video to help support the channel. Recently, the former UFC lightweight champion spoke with Ali Mack of Full Violence. Oliveira was asked various questions during the interview, and while discussing fans, the Brazilian star revealed he almost fell for a scam. Oliveira reported that a fan DM'd him and said that he'd been hit with various setbacks and needed help paying his rent. Du Plessis added that he felt bad for the person and wanted to help out, but what held him back was that the sum that person asked for didn't add up with someone who was actually in trouble. The guy asked me for 10,000 reais, and I was like, damn bro, I live at a really nice place and I don't pay this, you know? The charismatic fighter also added this before laughing. I live in a good area. We don't have a bill that spends this money. It's an interesting story for sure, not only because Oliveira was initially willing to help, but how the person clearly didn't do their research. Scams aside, it remains to be seen who Oliveira will battle next in the octagon. At UFC 309 last month, he defeated Michael Chandler for the second time, and in doing so ensured he remained in the title shot hunt. As it stands right now, Du Plessis is ranked number 2 in the UFC's lightweight division. Who do you want to see the former champion fight next? The number 1 ranked Arman Tsarukyan, who defeated Oliveira by split decision in August, is expected to challenge the champion Islam Makhachev in early 2025. Up next, Jon Jones is not the best heavyweight? Following Jon Jones' memorable win over Stipe Miocic last month, there are likely a lot fewer people who disagree that Bones is the GOAT. There's likely less people who don't believe he's the best pound-for-pound fighter in the game right now, although that remains a debate. But has Jones proven that he's the best heavyweight on the planet? Dan Hardy says no. Jones faced the legendary heavyweight at UFC 309 and put Miocic away with a spinning back kick to the body and follow-up shots. Although Miocic's best days were behind him and he retired afterward, Jones was showered with praise for his performance. Well, as the MMA world waits to see if Jones will fight interim champion Tom Aspinall, Hardy spoke with MMA Fighting, and while discussing Jones and who is the best heavyweight on the planet, the Outlaw said the following: I think Jon Jones is the pound-for-pound best. I think he's the best representation of mixed martial arts generally that we've ever seen. I think he's still evolving, which is terrifying, but is he the best current heavyweight on the planet? I don't think so. I think the winner of Aspinall versus Ngannou would be the answer, and speed versus power, and I don't know if Ngannou would want to wrestle because Aspinall has a fantastic ground game. That really is the question. No disrespect in any way to Jon. Current heavyweight champion, but not the current best heavyweight on the planet. Certainly not. So Hardy's comments are likely raising eyebrows, but he's not the only person who's opined that Aspinall is a better fighter than Jones at heavyweight. The same could be said for Ngannou in terms of how he matches up against Bones. All that aside, at the end of the day, unfortunately, we likely won't see Aspinall versus Ngannou or Jones versus Ngannou, unless there's a massive shift in the promotional landscape of MMA. But do you agree with Dan Hardy here? Do you think a fight between Aspinall and Ngannou would determine who's the baddest heavyweight on the planet right now? Aljamain Sterling breaks silence on fight delay. Aljamain Sterling and Movsar Evloev are finally going to go after it at UFC 310 next weekend. But recently, Aljo explained why he stuck to his guns and declined to fight Evloev sooner. For months, Sterling and Evloev exchanged verbal jabs online about fighting, and the fight was targeted for UFC 307 back in October. Ultimately, however, the fight was scheduled for UFC 310 in December. Well, in a recent video Sterling shared out, he outlined why he decided against fighting Evloev in early fall.
I asked for, ironically, an extra month because Movsar was trying to push me to come back sooner than I wanted to, and I told him, I'm not going to do that again. I learned my lesson from the last fight, which was my loss to O'Malley, and I told myself I'll never let somebody push me into a corner over money again, so at the end of the day, I've accomplished what I need to accomplish. So now when I compete, it's on my terms. It's when I feel like coming back, and it's when I feel good, mentally good, because you have to want to be in there to compete. If not, the octagon is a dangerous place to be unsure if you really want to be in there.
If you need a refresher, immediately after the UFC announced Sterling was going to fight O'Malley at UFC 292, denied the fight was a go and reported he was still dealing with injuries. Sterling did end up fighting and losing to O'Malley at the event, but he's repeatedly said that he was pressured to take that fight. After footage from the series Fight Inc. Inside the UFC was released, which showed UFC Chief Business Officer Hunter Campbell asking Sterling to take the fight, talk about whether he had returned too soon spiked again. So do you think Sterling made the right decision to postpone the Evloev fight? And do you see Aljo pulling off the upset win? Up next, Leon Edwards reveals next UFC fight date. We haven't seen Leon Edwards go to work in the octagon since he lost the welterweight title to Belal Muhammad last July, but it looks like we'll see Rocky back in the cage before Q1 of 2025 is up. As Ariel Helwani recently reported, Edwards has informed DAZN Boxing that he's going to headline the UFC's next card in London, England. Leon Edwards was just interviewed on DAZN Boxing broadcast by Jamie Ward. He revealed he's headlining the O2 card in London on March 22, 2025. Did not mention opponent. Not surprisingly, the news quickly generated reactions online and who the former champion could face next. JDM or Brady makes sense. The UFC fumbled it. It should have been Paddy versus Moicano headlining this card. That's an exciting fight that deserves to be 5 rounds. Wonder who Leon will be fighting though. Could it be Leon versus JDM? Snooze fest incoming. 5 rounds of pitter patter. Give it to Prates if the other top guys decline. I'm sure he'll take it. It's gonna be Masvidal. So given Edwards has already fought Kamaru Usman 3 times, and because Shavkat Rakhmonov and Ian Gary are fighting next weekend, Sean Brady or Jack Della Maddalena as an opponent makes sense. Both men are currently tied for 4th in the UFC's welterweight rankings. Of course, a lot of fans would be happy to see Edwards and Jorge Masvidal finally get after it in the octagon, on account of their famous 3-piece in a soda incident back in 2019. Well, a lot has happened since then, including Gamebred retiring from MMA in 2023. Masvidal has since announced he wants to return to the UFC, but he has not competed and is not ranked in the top 15. So if the UFC wants to keep focusing on the title shot implications, JDM or Brady could get the call. Okay, now let's take a look at Alexandre Pantoja talks about training for Kai Asakura. Kai Asakura is a new face for many casual or UFC only fans, but ahead of his scrap with the Japanese fighter, Alexandre Pantoja has been training with someone who knows him very, very well. Asakura has been tapped to fight the flyweight champion at UFC 310 next weekend in what will mark his octagon debut. Asakura has been granted the opportunity in part because Pantoja has already defeated many of the UFC's top flyweights, but because Asakura has been regarded as one of Japan's top fighters for several years now, where he was Rizen's bantamweight champ. Well, one man who fought Asakura during his time with Rizen not once but twice was Kyoji Horiguchi. Asakura brutally knocked out Horiguchi in 2019 in the opening round. And in their rematch in 2020, Horiguchi, however, returned the favor and ended Asakura's reign as the bantamweight champion. Well, as it turns out, Pantoja has been training with Horiguchi to prepare for UFC 310. During the countdown episode for the December 7th card, Pantoja had this to say about the former UFC title challenger. Kyoji is one of the best partners that I've had in my whole life. I learn a lot. He's a samurai, an amazing guy, and it's an amazing opportunity to train with him. I've seen Kyoji fight Kai 2 times, and in one of them, he won. He beat Horiguchi. That, for me, someone who can beat Kyoji, this guy is going to have a lot of power, but in their next fight, Kyoji that guy. That's some high and understandable praise for Horiguchi, who currently holds Rizen's flyweight crown. Speaking of the countdown show, the episode also documents Asakura's fascinating rise to combat sports fame in Japan. Kai's older brother, Mikuru, was a feared street fighter, but also transitioned into pro fighting. Several of his fights were recorded. As he ran out of opponents on the street, he invited Kai to throw down, and it was in that scrap that the latter realized he was a natural. Their scrap was also filmed, and all this is covered in the countdown episode. All this aside, do you see Asakura taking the flyweight belt from the renowned Brazilian fighter at UFC 310? And if Pantoja wins, what could come next for the champion? Recently, MMA Junkie reported that if Sean O'Malley had remained the bantamweight champ, Pantoja was planning to move up to 135 to fight Sugar. The two have continued to trade verbal jabs, following their well-documented sparring session and debate over who won it. While a fight with O'Malley now seems unlikely, could Pantoja explore moving up? Ciryl Gane reflects on Jon Jones' fight. A lot of fans and observers piled on Ciryl Gane for how he performed against Jon Jones, and some argued the bout proved the former interim champ was one-dimensional. But according to the heavyweight, it was not the real Gane who faced Bones at UFC 285. As you likely recall, Jones needed just over 2 minutes to take Gane down and submit him with a choke. While it was an impressive outing for Jones, who was making his heavyweight debut, the fight was a huge letdown for many. Well, fast forward to today, and Gane is set to battle fellow contender Alexander Volkov at UFC 310. This will be Gane's second fight since his loss to Jones, as he put away Sergey Spivak last September. In the countdown show that's just been released for UFC 310, Gane reflected on his stunning loss to Jones. Here's some of what he had to say. When I look back at it, it was obvious that I was not there. I don't recognize myself in there. It's something I've never done in my life. I've never fought that way before. My distance management, my movement, the alertness that I love to show, I had none of that. Looking back, I think that this experience has been beneficial. For me personally, it helped me to refocus on myself. It gave me a spirit of revenge, a competitive spirit. It'll be interesting to see what the reaction is to these comments from the MMA community. Is Gane pretty much admitting he choked against Jones? No pun intended. And do you see him challenging for the heavyweight crown again? Speaking of Jones, the MMA world continues to speculate about who Bones will fight next. For months, fans have been clamoring for Jones to fight Tom Aspinall, but Jones has repeatedly argued he doesn't need that fight and he's talked about facing Alex Pereira instead. Well, Gane's coach, Fernand Lopez, recently weighed in on this debate while talking with Inside Fighting, and while doing so, Lopez had this to say. Why do you want Jon Jones to look up and fight Tom Aspinall, when Tom Aspinall is 1, dangerous, 2, not valuable factor for legacy? On the other hand, you have Pereira, done everything, glory champion, double champion in the UFC. Why don't you go there and fight him, and even on the money standpoint, better seller on pay-per-view? Just think a little bit. Now, one could argue that beating Pereira wouldn't do much for Jones' legacy either, as Pereira has not been fighting at heavyweight, and he's only been competing exclusively in MMA for a few years. But what do you think? And do you believe that ultimately Jones won't fight Aspinall, even if the UFC offers him keys to the company's bank vault to do so? Khamzat Chimaev sends a message to Dricus Du Plessis about a future fight for the title. Khamzat posted on Twitter showing a picture of the president while tagging Dricus in the post with eyeball emojis. This indicates that Khamzat is going to or is going to have someone ask the president for a visa to fight in the USA for the middleweight title. This comes just days after DDP told his camp and his sparring partners to grow beards and scream "I kill everybody" to him while they spar, furthering the speculation that Khamzat versus Dricus is going to happen. Do you think the president will grant Khamzat a visa to fight? Let us know what you think in the comments. Here's what the MMA community had to say about the situation. It's the fight to make. In my opinion, he leapfrogged Strickland after his finish over Rob. Strickland's performance over Costa was boring and doesn't warrant a rematch. Khamzat did something nobody has done in the UFC, which is to submit Rob. It's a fresh, exciting matchup, unlike Sean versus DDP 2. Picking up losers now, huh? If this fight happens, it's just another easy win for Chimaev. Oh man, Sean Strickland, get ready, buddy. You're fighting Caio Borralho in the Apex. Cry, son of a Strickland. No one cares about you. You. In an era of Marabs, we needed a champion like DDP who's willing to take the hard fights when he could easily take an easier option. Strickland's gonna need a Theo Von session after this.